While record executives attempted to conceal her figure from cameras, Ann Wilson fought her weight for decades. Then, within a year, she shed 60 pounds. It's not even the biggest stunner though. You will be left stunned by Ann's journey from cocaine addiction to abrupt sobriety. From the lowest point to unexpected pregnancy at 41, the best is still to come. She tells the Globe as she battles cancer at the age of 74, born in 1950 in San Diego, Ann Wilson came from a military family that was often on the road. As a Marine Corps major, her father had the peculiar habit of inventing phrases to assist the children deal with her constant absence. Her mother established little customs. Pretending to dust off their shoes before bidding each house farewell was one of those customs. Before she was 12, Ann had already moved 13 times. Music remained constant despite the constant changes in the surroundings. Ray Charles, opera, and classical albums would fill the home on Sunday mornings. Pancakes would sizzle in the kitchen as her dad conducted in the living room. Ann's life would be shaped in ways she didn't yet comprehend by that peculiar combination of creativity and discipline. Ann was always starting over when the family moved to Seattle after visiting Taiwan and Panama. New regulations, new faces, new schools. She had already attended 7 schools across 3 countries by the time she was 15. She became more flexible as a result, but she also felt alienated. She was the new child every time she entered a classroom. Music was the sole constant in her life. It was a lifeline and a source of comfort that accompanied her everywhere, but she couldn't be shielded from everything by music. Speaking in class was a nightmare for Ann because of her stammer and weight issues. She was constantly teased by children. Ann hardly received any Valentine's Day cards, while other girls counted theirs. She thought about that day for years. The situation only got worse with puberty. She claimed to have fallen from the cliff once. Not attractive enough, not well liked enough, simply invisible. The pressure persisted even as an adult. Record executives were concerned about Hart's weight as she became well known and encouraged her to alter her appearance. In an attempt to conform to their desired look, she began using diet pills and skipping meals. She eventually resorted to weight loss surgery, which she described as the culmination of a lifetime battle. Ironically, being ill was the thing that gave her the most support throughout her most trying years. Ann was bedridden for months after contracting mononucleosis at the age of 12. Her mother got her a guitar to keep her occupied. Although she was never very good at playing it, it gave her a fresh perspective on music. More significantly, she discovered that her stutter vanished when she sang. She had a lovely, rich and powerful voice, something she was unaware she possessed. Perhaps for the first time it made her feel confident. She made the decision to focus entirely on music after high school. She began performing in tiny bands in Seattle, attempting to navigate. In 1970, everything was different. She went to Vancouver with her lover Michael Fisher, who had relocated there to escape the draft for Vietnam. Leaving her home to pursue love across a border was a brave choice. However, it brought her directly to the band that would come to define her life. She began penning the tunes that would become Hart's first successes in a small Kitsilano flat. Among them was Magic Man. Things started to come together because of her bond with Michael. On Valentine's Day in 1973, Michael's brother Roger became a member of the band. Nancy, Ann's younger sister and a talented guitarist, joined shortly after. The band began to seem less like a rock group and more like a complicated family when Nancy and Roger began dating. In Surrey, they practiced behind a home in a converted chicken coop. Their name was changed from Hocus Pocus to Hart that summer. It seemed like magic, Ann later remarked. However, magic is not a source of income. Between 1973 and 1975, they performed in every pub and club that would take them. Every night, 4 sets are performed. In some locations, the crowd hardly glanced up because they were so harsh. For 24 consecutive nights, they performed at a place called The Cave. They used Led Zeppelin covers to maintain the audience's interest while interjecting their own tunes wherever possible. Even if it didn't always succeed, it improved them anyway. As tight as a band, sharper on stage. Things went quickly for Ann Wilson and her band Hart, who were only getting started in the mid-1970s. Their first significant success was nearly coincidental. They received an invitation to play for Rod Stewart in a sold-out Montreal event in October 1975. It altered everything, even if it was unexpected and last minute. More people began to take notice after that night, and soon their debut album, Dreamboat Annie, was becoming quite popular. Magic Man was among the most notable tunes. Anne's connection with Michael Fisher, the band's manager, was the subject of her writing. There was ambiguity and mystery in the lyrics. It was seen as a narrative about a magnetic lover by some, and a drug dealer by others. It worked anyhow. The album itself peaked at number 7, while the single rose to number 9 on the charts. The whole Magic Man, which lasted 5 minutes and featured Nancy Wilson on guitar and 2 additional musicians, allowed the band to showcase their sound. The album's other song, Crazy on You, gained equal significance. Although it didn't go as high as number 35 on the charts, Anne's singing career took a significant turn with it. She had no idea that she had something in her voice until she recorded it in Vancouver. She changed notes, exerted more effort, and discovered a raw force that would later become her signature. The confusion of the world in the middle of the 1970s was reflected in the lyrics: tension, wars, and uncertainties. However, the song called for love and wildness in the midst of it all rather than introspection or surrender. Nancy then clarified that it was a means of expressing that, yes, the world is crazy, but let's go together. Heart was starting to make a big impression as their song rose in the charts and their fan base expanded. Behind the scenes, however, things were not going as planned. They chose to market the band in a way that surprised Anne and Nancy, according to their record label, Mushroom Records. The two sisters were shown bare-shouldered in a full-page Rolling Stone advertisement published by the label in late 1976, with the tagline, "Was only our first time." The advertisement, which appeared to be from a gossip magazine, suggested that the two of them were having an affair. The sisters were upset. Meanwhile, they were attempting to renegotiate their agreement with Mushroom. It seemed like an attack because of the time. Things just get worse. The connotations of the advertisement were echoed by a radio promoter who made a repulsive remark to Anne during a gig in Detroit. That was the tipping point for her. Her rage over that incident burst into a song. Anne picked up a pen at her hotel and began writing. Barracuda, a song roiling with rage and anger, was the end product. The industry's attempts to dominate, sexualize, or denigrate people were the focus, not just one remark or advertisement. Barracuda made a powerful impression with its snarling guitar riff and intense beat. It became one of the most well-known songs by the band and peaked at number 11. Particularly for women, who interpreted it as a message of strength and defiance, the lyrics took on a deeper significance. Heart continued to move forward despite the ongoing battle with Mushroom Records. Despite Mushroom's attempts to stop them, and even the release of an incomplete album without their consent, the band continued working on a new project. They recorded Little Queen in Seattle earlier that year, and it was released in May 1977. With a blend of powerful rock and folk, gentle melodies, and large booming choruses, it was everything they had been striving for. The CD was a hit, despite the legal quagmire. After selling more than 3 million copies, it peaked at number 9 on the charts. Songs like Love Alive began softly, almost dreamily, before intensifying into a rock hymn. Little Queen compared themselves to Aerosmith by showcasing their funkier side. But at their stadium performances, Anne's solo song Kick It Out, which had more melody, became a crowd favorite. They were now headliners, rather than merely opening acts. An unusual feat has been accomplished by the end of 1977. At the same moment, all 3 of their albums, Little Queen, Magazine and Dreamboat Annie, were in the charts. They weren't simply having luck, that much was obvious. Their sound was unique, and they were here to stay. Things for Heart were going south by the end of the 1970s. The band was already under strain, but when Ann Wilson's relationship with Michael Fisher broke, things got really bad. When Anne learned that Michael had fallen in love with someone else, she was crushed. Meanwhile, her sister Nancy ended her relationship with Michael's brother Roger Fisher, who was also the main guitarist for the band. Too much tension was brought on by the grief on both sides. Roger's emotions blew over during one performance in Oregon. On stage, he shattered his guitar in front of an audience. It was excruciating pain, not a rock star move. Subsequently, he said that the situation had turned poisonous, and that he was in total mental horror. He was told he was fired by the band's management shortly after. Suddenly, one of Heart's original members was no more. Nothing would ever be the same for the band. The band was under increasing hardship as the 1980s got underway. Together, the men and women who had previously made Heart unique were now being torn apart. It was full with emotional suffering. Ann Wilson subsequently stated, "The bandmates began bickering, and there was always a gender divide. About the women, the males engaged in gossip. It was the ladies who talked about the guys. There was no compromise." Meanwhile, the Wilson sisters received more media attention than any other member of the band. The others were not happy about that. Ann acknowledged that it angered and wounded the men's sentiments. That rage eventually evolved into envy, making cooperation increasingly difficult. There was still another issue. The groupie culture prevalent in rock music was not to the Wilson sisters' taste. They didn't keep their sentiments to themselves, and didn't enjoy the way ladies were treated when traveling. They were at conflict with some of the band's male members as a result. They said that because of the unpleasant situation, they felt compelled to lie to the spouses of the band members about what was going on tour. Everything began to seem dishonest. The sisters' distance from the rest of the group increased as they made an effort to uphold their moral principles. They weren't only retaliating against their fellow musicians, they were resisting the way the industry as a whole operated. Money began to change everything as the band gained popularity, and they recalled how they all started off impoverished and came together to pursue the same goal. But as the money and people shifted, so did the success. The Wilson sisters found themselves in an odd situation due to fame. They were segregated from their own bandmate, imprisoned in hotel rooms, and under protection. It was difficult to connect with anyone because of the strain. Their once shared ideal began to wane. Now everyone had their own objectives. The band had lost its cohesiveness. It was disintegrating gradually. Piece by piece, everything collapsed, and Heart went through a difficult time. The following albums didn't do as well as their 1980 record, Baby La Strange. When Private Audition was released in 1982, it didn't sell as well as they had intended. Passion Works didn't perform any better the next year. The band's founding members Michael Durocher and Steve Fossen departed. Although there were newcomers, there was a lack of synergy. Not even the well-known producers they collaborated with helped. One producer left after declaring that their recording included no hits. Later on, Ann acknowledged that she was having a lot of parties at the time. She was struggling and lost. By 1983, the band was dropped by their label because of problems in the studio. Rock Bottom was the location. Heart made a significant resurgence in the middle of the 1980s. The band regained its prominence. After their 1985 album Heart sold millions of copies. These Dreams, their first ever #1 single, was among their many hits. However, Ann Wilson was silently going through one of the most difficult periods of her life. While the rest of the world witnessed the success, everything had altered with the rise of MTV. These days, the image was more important than the music alone. Even though Ann's voice was what set the band apart, she was still required to have a model-like appearance. It was first enjoyable to dress up with large hair and cosmetics, but that enjoyment quickly faded. It soon became pressure, enormous pressure to be someone she wasn't all the time. Her physical attributes, rather than her skill, were evaluated, and it became worse the more well-known they were. According to Ann, they were the worst years of her professional life as a woman. There were hints or blatant remarks about her appearance in every interview, picture session and video. Not about her voice or her performance on stage, but simply about her appearance. Years later, she was still troubled by one moment. She picked up a concert review while strolling through an airport following a performance. She was almost broken by what she read. She was ripped apart by the writer. Not the music, not the singing, only the way she looked. There was nothing to say about her voice. She had to rush to a toilet cubicle to cry and regain her breath since it was so personal and hurtful. She thought she was going crazy, as she had previously made every effort to become intelligent. She went hungry. She used diet medications. Although she appeared normal on the surface, she was always hungry on the inside. She then stated that although I appeared normal, I was actually fasting a lot, and I received accolades for it. What a disaster that is. Things didn't get much better even when she quit starving herself in the middle of the 1980s. The music business didn't let her forget that she put on weight swiftly. By then MTV had taken control. More than ever, music videos were important. However, Anne wasn't treated fairly by the cameras, using deception to conceal her physique. They captured her visage in close-up. They clad her with heavy jackets. Nancy, her thinner sibling, had full-body vaccinations in the meanwhile. She moved freely, posed and danced. Anne saw it all. Everyone did. One individual even commented on the internet that while Anne was hidden, you could always see Nancy moving about in films. The message was unmistakable. Anne didn't match their desired picture, nor did those in the industry conceal it. You don't want to be seen full body, okay? Someone informed her bluntly. Anne had vivid memories of that time. It was painful. These remarks accumulated. They had an impact on her self-perception. Her self-assurance began to erode. Even horrible were record execs. They were concerned that Anne's passing might damage the band's reputation. The quality of her singing was irrelevant. Her appearance was what counted. According to her, women in that era were expected to do everything: act, sing, and have a model appearance. She was particularly affected by one review. Her voice was not mentioned at all. It simply tore apart her appearance. She had to hide in a loo while reading it in an airport to prevent others from witnessing her tears. The strain eventually caused her to collapse. She began experiencing panic episodes and stage fright. She believed that simply by being there, she was damaging the band's reputation. The strain became unbearable. Made the decision to assume command in 2002. She underwent surgery to lose weight. They referred to it as a lap band. Compared to other forms of surgery, it wasn't as drastic, but it was beneficial. She struggled with back and knee discomfort, and was almost 100 pounds overweight. In less than a year following the procedure, she shed 60 pounds. She felt more liberated, lighter. The pain in her body had subsided. She was able to move once again. She had no discomfort while she sang. Her life was altered by it, but she was battling more than just weight. She also battled addiction. Alcohol and cocaine were a part of her life for years. Cocaine is everywhere, she claimed. In the videos, in the music, everywhere. The joy was gone. She became numb as a result. And despite losing friends to drugs, including Kurt Cobain, Lane Staley, and Andrew Wood, she was unable to quit. Not quite yet. She didn't develop an addiction overnight. Slowly it grew. The hurtful remarks regarding her physique, the need to perform, all of the ongoing concern gathered up. She claimed that after reading one particularly scathing review, she had to go to the loo to collect herself. She eventually turned to drugs and alcohol as a coping mechanism. And she wasn't alone either. She once said that the majority of rock artists she knew had experienced a similar situation. Few people escaped it. Finally, a shift occurred in 2009. She reached her limit. She abruptly quit drinking. She didn't attend treatment. She did not participate in a 12-step program. Rather, she turned to her family, friends, and other musicians who had cleaned up. She attended treatment as well. She was aware that she must quit. She thought she would die if she didn't. Not only did sobriety save her life, her inventiveness returned as a result. She claimed that it was like removing a mental tarp. She was unable to compose music when intoxicated. Simply put, ideas would not come. But everything changed once she got clean. Her songs became more powerful. Her voice was stronger. Hart put all of her fresh enthusiasm into songs like Dear Old America and Masha Allah on her 2012 album Fanatic. She also had a clearer perspective on her life. Addiction, she added, deceives you. In reality, it deprives you of everything positive as well, even if you may believe you are shielding yourself from suffering. Additionally, getting sober altered her approach to her relationship with Nancy. They were not always in agreement. wish to experiment with the band. Nancy wants to continue doing what was effective. They became estranged as a result, yet their love for one another remained unwavering. According to Anne, incidents like these do occur, but they eventually improve. We are more in love with one another. Ann Wilson made a decision that would change her life at the beginning of 1991. She decided to have a child on her own, while she was at the top of her game with the rock group Heart. On February 3rd, a baby girl called Marie was born through adoption. Adopting children was uncommon at the period for unmarried women, particularly those in the public eye. What was normal, however, didn't matter to Anne. She was adamant. Throughout the pregnancy, she maintained contact with Marie's biological mother and facilitated a discreet adoption. She claimed that the young child triggered feelings she was unaware she had when the news broke. She claimed to be a miracle. "I can provide my child a lot." In the same year, she took on the job of mother while balancing recordings and performances. Adopted a second kid, a boy called Dustin. In 1998, 7 years later, she was now parenting 2 kids, while continuing to tour and perform. She managed to balance parenthood with celebrity. Even if it wasn't easy, she made it work by choosing both paths in a field where women were frequently advised to choose one or the other. In the background, Anne's complex love story was also developing at the time. She had gone on a date with a man called Dean Wetter back in the 1980s. The memory stayed with her even though it didn't develop into a relationship at the time. They reconnected several years later, when they had both matured and changed. Things clicked this time. Anne and Dean married in a low-key outdoor wedding in California in 2015. She wore sparkling shoes and a lovely outfit. Her statements were straightforward yet kind. "He is my spouse, friend and angel. I'm genuinely delighted." However, the joy was short-lived. Something that rocked everything happened only 16 months after the wedding. In August 2016, Dean argued with Nancy Wilson's adolescent boys during a Heart performance in Washington. It became violent. Dean allegedly grabbed both guys by the throat and struck one of them. He was taken into custody when the police were called. A large number of family members attended the local performance. What was supposed to be a musical evening turned into a nightmare. The Wilson sisters hardly talked after that. They continued to perform, but it was obvious that something was wrong. They kept their distance backstage. Even contracts were drafted to prevent their teams from meeting. Dean entered a guilty plea and was placed on probation at the beginning of 2017. The sisters each went their separate ways and gave solo performances as the ensemble took a break. Nancy formed a new organization. Heart appeared to be permanently doomed for a time. However, as time went on, the ice gradually started to melt. Anne and Nancy got back together for the Love Alive tour in 2019. Fans were ecstatic since it was their first in 3 years. Together with Joan Jett and other strong female rock stars, they performed at about 40 events across the United States. Crow, Cheryl. It was like old times for a while. Not everything had mended though. Nancy disclosed in 2022 that she wanted her own lineup, and that the sisters had resorted to another argument, this time about who should perform in the band. Nancy started her own version of Heart with well-known artists, since she didn't feel comfortable joining a group of strangers. She dubbed it Nancy Wilson's Heart, and it gave the songs a new voice. She made it apparent that this was only a fresh perspective, and not an attempt to replace Anne. Then in 2024, Anne faced yet another obstacle in life. She announced her cancer diagnosis to the public in July. She had recently finished a significant tour at the age of 74 when medical professionals discovered a tumor. It was successfully removed during her operation. To be safe, however, her physicians suggested chemotherapy. Anne had to make the difficult decision to postpone the remainder of the tour. She assured followers that she will return in 2025, so they shouldn't worry. She responded, "This is just a pause. I have more songs to sing." Remained truthful with her fans as chemotherapy started. In September, she wrote in an update that the therapy was difficult. She acknowledged that waiting for test results was the most difficult aspect. When she was done with chemotherapy, however, she retained her sense of humor. The poison did its job, but it can now get the hell out of my body," she remarked. Although she was aware that she would still require less intensive care in the future, she remained optimistic. She was fortunate. She said that because they discovered the disease early, her narrative ended happily. She made another significant step while she was recuperating. She made the decision to sell her stunning Florida property in September 2024. She was asking $2 million for the property, which she had purchased in 2019. The riverfront property had enormous oak trees, an infinity pool, and a guest house. People wondered if she was attempting to simplify her life so she could concentrate on the things that really mattered by selling the property while undergoing chemotherapy. Ann Wilson is prepared to make a comeback now that her health is getting better, and she has fresh tour dates planned. She has continued to go on despite illness, family strife, grief, and love. Her power, her voice, and her soul have never ceased. They have simply briefly halted.